The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital buzzed like angry wasps overhead as I pushed my cleaning cart down the endless corridor. 3 a.m., and the antiseptic smell had long since stopped bothering me. My hands were raw from the industrial soap. My back ached from bending over beds and bathrooms. But the paycheck would keep the lights on for another month. Barely. I'd been working double shifts for 6 months now, ever since Rafi dropped out of college to chase his dreams of easy money. My younger brother had always been the charmer, the one with the bright smile and bigger plans. I was the practical one, the one who cleaned up messes, literally and figuratively. The elevator dinged as I reached the lobby, signaling the end of another grueling night. My reflection in the polished steel doors showed a 24-year-old woman who looked older, wearier. Dark circles shadowed my brown eyes, and my black hair was pulled back in a perpetual ponytail. This wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was the life I had. Outside, the November air bit through my thin jacket as I walked the 12 blocks home. Our apartment building squatted like a concrete tumor between a pawn shop and a liquor store, its broken security light casting eerie shadows across the cracked sidewalk. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs, my sneakers squeaking against the worn rubber treads. The moment I opened our door, I knew something was wrong. Rafi sat hunched on our second-hand couch, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his hands shaking as he gripped a beer bottle. Dark bruises bloomed along his jawline like purple flowers. "Rafi?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "What happened to your face?" He looked up, and I saw fear in his eyes, real bone-deep terror that made my stomach clench. "Ayla, I'm in trouble. Bad trouble." The words hit me like ice water. I dropped my purse and moved toward him, my exhaustion forgotten. "What kind of trouble?" "I owe money. A lot of money," his voice cracked. $50,000. The number hung in the air between us like a death sentence. 50,000 might as well have been 50 million for people like us. How? How is that even possible? There was this poker game. High stakes. I thought I could win it back, But I kept losing, and they kept giving me credit. And now, he touched his bruised face gingerly. Now they want their money in 48 hours, or they're going to kill me. My legs gave out, and I sank into the chair across from him. "Who are they? Can't we go to the police?" Rafi laughed, but there was no humor in it. "These guys make the cops look like choir boys, Ayla. They own half the city. There's no running from this." A heavy knock echoed through our thin door, making us both freeze. 3 deliberate raps that seemed to shake the entire apartment. Rafi's face went white. "Don't answer it," he whispered. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. A voice, followed, smooth and cultured, completely at odds with our surroundings. "Miss Castellano? I represent a businessman who would like to discuss an arrangement regarding your brother's situation." I looked at Rafi, whose eyes had gone wide with a mixture of hope and terror. The voice continued, patient but firm. "I know you're both inside. This offer expires in 30 seconds. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I walked to the door and opened it. 2 men stood in the hallway, both wearing expensive suits that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. The younger one had kind eyes that didn't match the gun I glimpsed beneath his jacket. The older one, clearly in charge, smiled with the practiced warmth of a funeral director. "Miss Castellano, I'm Vincent Torino. May we come in?" Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. I stepped aside, and they entered our shabby living room like wolves in a henhouse, their presence making everything seem smaller and shabbier by comparison. Vincent's eyes found Rafi immediately. "Mr. Castellano, you look like you've had a difficult evening." "Who are you people?" I managed to ask, though my voice sounded strange and distant. "As I mentioned, I represent a businessman, a very successful businessman who has taken an interest in your family's situation." Vincent settled into our rickety kitchen chair as if it were a throne. "He has a proposition that could solve all of your problems." 20 minutes later, I sat across from Vincent Torino in a 24-hour diner that smelled of coffee and broken dreams. The fluorescent lights were just as harsh as the hospital's, but somehow they felt more honest here. At least this place didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said, wrapping my hands around a cup of coffee I couldn't afford. Your boss wants to marry me. That's correct. And in exchange, my brother's debt disappears. Not just disappears. Your brother receives ongoing protection. He'll be safe from his current creditors and any future complications. Vincent stirred sugar into his espresso with mechanical precision. It's quite generous, actually. Generous. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. What kind of marriage are we talking about? I mean, what would he expect from me? You would live in his home, attend certain social functions as his wife, maintain the appearance of a normal marriage. Vincent's smile never wavered. Beyond that, the specific terms would be between you and him. I don't even know his name. Adrian Moretti. Perhaps you've seen him in the society pages. The name meant nothing to me, but then again, I didn't exactly run in society circles. What's he like? Successful, ambitious, private. Each word was carefully chosen, revealing nothing. He's not a man who takes rejection well, Miss Castellano. This offer comes with a 24-hour expiration. Aiba stared out the diner's greasy window at the city beyond. Somewhere out there, Rafi was probably pacing our apartment, waiting for news that might save his life. Somewhere else, a man I'd never met was apparently willing to marry a complete stranger to acquire, what? A wife? A possession? A cleaning lady with a marriage certificate? Why me? I asked. He's rich, powerful. He could have anyone. Perhaps, but he's chosen you. Vincent checked his expensive watch. 23 hours and 42 minutes remaining. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. This wasn't really a choice. It was an ultimatum dressed up in expensive clothes. Marry a stranger or let my brother die. What if I say no? Vincent's smile finally faltered, just for a moment. I don't think that would be wise, Miss Castellano, for anyone involved. The next morning felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold on a movie screen. I stood in the waiting room of the city clerk's office, wearing a white dress I'd bought at a thrift store and shoes that pinched my feet. Rafi sat beside me, his bruises hidden under carefully applied concealer, fidgeting with a tie that was older than both of us. You don't have to do this, he whispered for the 10th time. Yes, I do. I squeezed his hand. And you know it. The office door opened, and Vincent Torino emerged, followed by a man who commanded attention simply by existing. Adrian Moretti was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair and darker eyes that seemed to catalog everything in the room in a single glance. His suit was perfectly tailored, his posture military straight, and when he looked at me, I felt like a specimen under glass. Miss Castellano. His voice was deep, controlled, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. You look lovely. It was a polite lie. I looked like exactly what I was, a poor girl in a cheap dress, about to make a deal with the devil. But I managed to nod and say, thank you. The ceremony itself took less than 10 minutes. We signed papers while a bored clerk shuffled through the legal requirements. Adrian's hand was warm and steady when he slipped the ring onto my finger, a simple gold band that probably cost more than my car. When the clerk pronounced us husband and wife, Adrian leaned down and brushed his lips across my cheek, so briefly it might have been my imagination. Congratulations, Vincent said, producing a camera from nowhere, just a few photos for the records. As flashes popped around us, I caught Adrian watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Not cruel, not kind, just calculating, as if he were working out a complex equation and I was one of the variables. Outside the courthouse, a black car waited at the curb, not a limousine, that would have been too obvious, but something sleek and expensive that purred like a satisfied cat. Where are we going? I asked as Adrian held the door open for me. Home, he said simply. Rafi hugged me, tight before I got in the car. I'll pay you back for this, he whispered in my ear. I swear, Ayla, I'll find a way to make this right. I wanted to tell him that some things couldn't be made right, only endured. Instead, I hugged him back and tried to memorize the feeling of having someone in the world who loved me unconditionally. As the car pulled away from the curb, I watched Rafi grow smaller in the rear window until he disappeared entirely. When I turned back around, Adrian was studying me with those dark, unreadable eyes. Welcome to my world, Mrs. Moretti, he said quietly. The mansion rose from its manicured grounds like something from a movie set, all stone and glass and impossible elegance. As our car passed through wrought iron gates that closed behind us with a decisive clang, I pressed my face to the window and tried to process what I was seeing. Gardens that belonged in magazines, fountains that probably cost more than my annual salary, security cameras perched on every corner like electronic hawks, watching everything with unblinking eyes. "It's big," I said stupidly. 47 rooms, Adrian replied, without looking up from his phone. "Most of them you'll never need to enter." The car stopped in front of a curved stone staircase that led to double doors tall enough for giants. A man in a black suit appeared as if by magic to open my door, his movements precise and professional. "Ma'am," he said with a slight bow. Inside, the foyer soared 3 stories high, dominated by a chandelier that cast rainbow prisms across marble floors. Oil paintings in heavy gold frames lined the walls, portraits of stern-faced men and women who looked like they'd never smiled in their lives. "The staff will show you to your room," Adrian said, already moving toward a hallway that disappeared into the mansion's depths. "Dinner is at 7. Please don't be late." He was gone before I could respond, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a woman who'd materialized beside me like a well-dressed ghost. "Mrs. Moretti," she said, with a crisp British accent. "I'm Margaret, the house manager, if you'll follow me." My room, God, calling it a room was like calling the ocean a puddle, was larger than our entire apartment. The bed alone could have slept 6 people comfortably, draped in silk and cashmere that probably cost months of my salary. French doors opened onto a private balcony overlooking the gardens, and a sitting area by the fireplace looked like something from a luxury hotel. "Your things?" Margaret inquired politely. I held up the single duffel bag that contained everything I owned. "This is it." If she was surprised, she didn't show it. "We'll arrange for a shopping trip tomorrow. Mr. Moretti prefers his wife to be appropriately dressed for their social obligations." Their social obligations, as if I'd chosen any of this. "Is there anything else you need, ma'am?" About 1,000 questions crowded my throat, but I settled on the most immediate one. "Where exactly can I go in the house?" Margaret's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "The main floors are available to you, of course. The east wing is Mr. Moretti's private office space and is off-limits. The basement level houses the wine cellar and storage areas, also restricted. And the 3rd floor," she paused. "Well, there's really nothing of interest on the 3rd floor," which meant, of course, that the 3rd floor was probably the most interesting place in the entire house. After Margaret left, I explored my gilded cage. The closet was bigger than my old bedroom, completely empty except for a few silk robes, hanging like ghostly reminders of the woman I was supposed to become. The bathroom had a tub that could double as a swimming pool and enough marble to build a small temple. I sank onto the bed, God, it was soft, and tried to process what had happened to my life in the span of 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I'd been Isla Castellano, hospital cleaner and overprotective sister. Now I was Mrs. Adrian Moretti, wife to a man I didn't know, living in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. A soft knock interrupted my spiral into self-pity. A young woman peered around the door, her uniform marking her as part of the housekeeping staff. "Mrs. Moretti, I'm Elena. I'll be helping you get ready for dinner." "I can dress myself," I said, perhaps more sharply than necessary. Elena's eyes widened. "Oh, of course, ma'am. It's just that Mr. Moretti mentioned you might need assistance selecting appropriate attire." Appropriate attire, because apparently I couldn't be trusted to dress myself for dinner in my own home. Except it wasn't my home, was it? It was his, and I was just another acquisition to be managed and maintained. At exactly 7 o'clock, I found myself standing outside the dining room doors, wearing a black dress that Elena had produced from somewhere and shoes that actually fit. My reflection in the polished wood showed a woman I barely recognized. Hair styled, makeup subtle but expertly applied, posture straight despite the terror churning in my stomach. The dining room was a study in intimidation. A table long enough to seat 20 people stretched beneath another massive chandelier, set with china and crystal that probably cost more than most people's cars. Adrian sat at the head of the table, still in his perfectly pressed suit, reading something on his tablet. He looked up when I entered, his dark eyes taking in my transformed appearance with what might have been approval. "You look better." "Thank you?" It came out as a question, because I wasn't sure if he'd given me a compliment or stated a fact. "Please, sit." He gestured to the chair on his right, close enough to talk, far enough to maintain distance. A man I hadn't seen before appeared with wine, pouring something red and expensive into my glass with practiced ease. The first course appeared moments later, some sort of soup that probably had a French name I couldn't pronounce. "You're very quiet," Adrian observed after several minutes of silence. "I'm processing. What conclusion have you reached?" I looked up from my untouched soup to find him watching me with genuine curiosity. "That this is all completely insane." "Insane how?" "Yesterday I was cleaning hospital bathrooms. Today I'm eating soup that probably costs more per bowl than I make in a week. Married to a man I've spoken to for exactly..." I glanced at my watch. 12 minutes total. 13 minutes now. Despite everything, I almost smiled. "Are you always so precise?" "Precision prevents problems." He took a sip of his wine. "Tell me about yourself, Ayla." "What do you want to know?" "Everything. I don't make uninformed decisions." The casualness of it took my breath away. "You married me based on what? A background check?" "Among other things." "Such as?" Adrian set down his wine glass and leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You work double shifts to support your brother, despite the fact that he's an adult capable of supporting himself. You've never been arrested, never defaulted on a loan, never even had a parking ticket. Your supervisors describe you as reliable, conscientious, and invisible." "Invisible?" "You don't cause problems. You don't draw attention. You do your job and go home." His eyes never left my face. "Those are valuable qualities in a wife." The words hit like a slap. "You married me because I'm boring?" "I married you because you're safe." Safe. The word hung between us like a curse. I was safe, predictable, manageable. A woman so unremarkable that marrying her wouldn't complicate his life in any meaningful way. "What do you do?" I asked, proud that my voice remained steady. "For work, I mean." "I have various business interests." The non-answer was obviously deliberate, but I pressed anyway. "What kind of business interests?" "Import and export, real estate, investment management." He signaled for the next course. "Nothing that would interest you." "How do you know what interests me?" "You don't know anything about me except what's in some file." Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or annoyance. "You're angry." "Shouldn't I be?" "You bought me, Adrian, like a car or a piece of furniture. You paid my brother's debt, and now I'm supposed to sit in this museum and be grateful for the privilege. You could have said no." "No, I couldn't, and you know it." We stared at each other across the expanse of polished mahogany, and I realized this was our first real conversation. Not the polite exchanges during the ceremony or the careful questions about accommodations, but an actual discussion where we weren't pretending this was anything other than what it was, a transaction. "You're right," he said finally. "You couldn't say no, but that doesn't make you a victim, Ayla. It makes you pragmatic." "What's the difference?" "Victims wait for rescue. Pragmatists adapt." He reached across the table and touched my wrist. Just a brief contact that sent an unexpected jolt through my nervous system. "The question is, which one are you?" Later that night, I stood on my balcony, looking out over the gardens, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The grounds were illuminated by subtle lighting that made everything look like a fairy tale, beautiful and slightly unreal. Movement caught my eye, and I looked up to see Adrian on his own balcony 1 floor above mine. He was facing away from me, talking quietly into his phone, his posture tense in a way it hadn't been during dinner. As I watched, his voice rose slightly, and I caught fragments of conversation carried on the night air. Timeline moved up. "Not negotiable. Make sure they understand the consequences." He turned slightly, and I saw his profile in the moonlight, hard, cold, and utterly different from the man who'd made polite conversation over dinner. This was someone else entirely, someone comfortable with consequences and timelines and making sure people understood things they probably didn't want to understand. I stepped back into the shadows of my room, but not before Adrian glanced down and saw me. Our eyes met across the darkness, and for a moment I saw something in his expression that made my breath catch. Not anger at being observed, but something else, something that looked almost like loneliness. Then he turned away, and I was left wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. 3 days into my new life, I was going stir-crazy. The mansion was beautiful, but it was also a prison, albeit one with Egyptian cotton sheets and marble bathrooms. I'd explored every room I was allowed to enter, read books from Adrian's extensive library, and endured shopping trips with Elena that felt more like military operations than retail therapy. Adrian himself remained a mystery. He left early each morning, returned late each evening, and treated me with the kind of polite distance you'd show a houseguest you were mildly fond of. We ate dinner together, made small talk about nothing important, and retreated to our separate worlds. I was coming down the main staircase when I heard voices from the hallway that led to Adrian's off-limits office wing. 3 men in expensive suits stood near the entrance, their conversation hushed but intense. "Shipment from Marseille," one was saying. "Customs won't be a problem," replied another. The third man, older with silver hair and scars on his hands, shook his head. "The Torino family thinks they can move in on our territory. They're wrong." I froze halfway down the stairs, suddenly understanding that I was hearing something I shouldn't be hearing. But I couldn't seem to make myself move, fascinated and terrified by the casual way they discussed things that sounded distinctly illegal. "What about the new wife?" Silverhair asked. "Is she a problem?" "She's nobody," replied the first man. "Adrian's keeping her around for appearances. Once this business with the Russians is settled, he'll probably get rid of her." Get rid of her. The words echoed in my head as I finally forced myself to continue down the stairs, moving as quietly as possible. The men were so absorbed in their conversation that they didn't notice me, but my hands were shaking by the time I reached the bottom. I managed to make it to the kitchen before my legs gave out. Elena found me there 10 minutes later, sitting at the staff table with my head in my hands. "Mrs. Moretti, are you ill?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." Elena studied me with concern. "Perhaps you should rest. The house can be overwhelming at first." "Elena," I said carefully, "what exactly does Mr. Moretti do for work?" The young woman's face went carefully blank. "I'm sure I don't know, ma'am. That's not really my concern." But the way she avoided my eyes told me she knew exactly what Adrian did for work, and it wasn't importing legitimate goods from legitimate businesses. That afternoon, I was in the garden trying to process what I'd overheard when I noticed one of the security guards leaning heavily against a stone bench, his face pale and his left arm cradled against his chest. "Are you hurt?" I asked, approaching cautiously. He looked up, startled. "Ma'am, I'm fine. Just need a moment." But he clearly wasn't fine. Blood seeped through his shirt, and his breathing was shallow and quick. "You need medical attention." "I can't leave my post. This is ridiculous." I looked around to make sure we were alone, then knelt beside him. "Let me see." Hospital training kicked in as I examined the wound. A knife cut, probably, shallow but long and still bleeding. Not life-threatening if treated properly, but definitely requiring more than the handkerchief he was pressing against it. "I have first aid supplies in my room," I said. "Can you make it that far without passing out?" He nodded, though his face was gray with pain. 20 minutes later, I had him patched up with proper bandages and antibiotics from the medical kit I'd insisted Elena procure for me. As I worked, he told me his name was Marcus and that he'd been with Adrian for 3 years. "How did this happen?" I asked as I secured the last of the bandages. Marcus hesitated. "Work accident." "What kind of work involves knife accidents?" "The kind that pays well and doesn't ask too many questions." I was cleaning up the medical supplies when movement outside caught my eye. Adrian stood in the garden below my balcony, looking up at my window with an expression I couldn't read. How long had he been there? How much had he seen? Our eyes met through the glass, and I felt that same strange jolt I'd experienced at dinner a few nights ago. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me to wonder if kindness was a liability in this world I'd stumbled into. 2 more days passed in the same routine of polite meals and careful distance. But something had shifted between Adrian and me, a tension that hadn't been there before. He watched me more carefully, as if trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly become more complex. I was coming back from my morning walk when I heard voices from his office. The door was slightly ajar, which never happened. Something made me pause in the hallway, just out of sight. "The Castellano situation needs to be resolved," Vincent Torino was saying. "It is resolved," Adrian replied coldly. "Is it?" "Because my sources say the girl has been asking questions. About your business, about the security team. She's not as naive as you thought. She's curious, that's natural. Curiosity killed more than cats in our business. Vincent's voice carried a clear threat. Maybe it's time to remind her of her place. Touch her, and you'll discover exactly what curiosity can accomplish. The menace in Adrian's voice was unmistakable, and I pressed myself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. You're getting attached, Vincent said, with what sounded like amusement. That's dangerous. What's dangerous is thinking you can threaten my wife and walk away intact. My heart hammered against my ribs as footsteps approached the door. I managed to slip into a nearby powder room just as Vincent emerged from the office, his face dark with anger. When I was sure he was gone, I crept back toward Adrian's office. The door was still ajar, and I could see him standing at the window, his hands clasped behind his back. You can come in, Ayla, he said, without turning around. I know you're there. Caught, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was exactly what I'd expected. Dark wood, expensive furniture, and walls lined with books that probably contained more than literary wisdom. How did you know? Your perfume. He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that looked almost like approval. Lavender and vanilla. Very distinctive. I blushed despite myself. I wasn't trying to spy. Weren't you? Okay, maybe a little, but can you blame me? I'm living in a house where half the rooms are off limits, married to a man who won't tell me what he does for work, and apparently some people think I should be reminded of my place. I'd say curiosity is justified. Adrian moved closer, and I fought the urge to step back. This close, I could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made my pulse quicken despite everything. What do you think I do for work, Ayla? The question hung between us like a loaded gun. I could lie, pretend I hadn't heard anything, hadn't figured anything out. Or I could tell the truth and see what happened. I think you're involved in things that most people would call illegal, I said quietly. I think the business interests you mentioned are probably not the kind that file tax returns. And I think the reason Vincent was talking about getting rid of me is because I'm starting to see too much. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. And what are you going to do with that information? What can I do? I'm already in this, whether I want to be or not. The question is, are you going to have me killed now that I know? No. The answer came without hesitation. But I need to know if you're going to run. I looked around the office, at the expensive furniture, the security monitors in the corner, the safe behind the painting that was probably full of things I didn't want to know about. Then I looked back at Adrian, this man who'd married me to solve a problem, and now stood waiting for me to choose between flight and something else entirely. Where would I go? I asked. My brother's still in danger if I disappear. And honestly, after 4 days of living like this, I gestured at the luxury surrounding us. Going back to my old life feels impossible. That's not an answer. Then here's your answer. I'm not running. But I'm not going to keep pretending I don't know what's happening around me either. If I'm going to be Mrs. Adrian Moretti, then I want to actually be your wife, not just some ornament you trot out for appearances. Adrian stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression, surprise, calculation, and something else I couldn't identify. Being my wife means accepting things you might not be comfortable with, he said finally. I'm already uncomfortable. At least this way I'll know why. He reached out and touched my face, his fingers tracing my cheek with surprising gentleness. Once you know everything, there's no going back to ignorance. Good, I whispered. I'm tired of being ignorant. And then, before I could lose my nerve or he could change his mind, I rose up on my toes and kissed him. It was supposed to be brief, experimental, a test of the strange tension that had been building between us. But the moment our lips met, something ignited. Adrian's arms came around me, pulling me against him as he deepened the kiss. And I realized that whatever else was true about our bizarre arrangement, the chemistry between us was entirely real. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Adrian's eyes had gone dark in that way that made my pulse race, and his hands were still tangled in my hair. This complicates things, he said quietly. Everything about this situation is already complicated. True. His thumb traced my lower lip, and I shivered. But this particular complication could get you killed. Then we'll have to make sure it doesn't. That night, Adrian didn't retreat to his separate world after dinner. Instead, he took me to his study, a smaller, more intimate space than his office, and poured us both whiskey from a crystal decanter that probably cost more than my old car. "What do you want to know?" he asked, settling into the chair across from mine. Everything, I thought. But I started with the most immediate question. "Are you in the Mafia?" That's a very old-fashioned term. Is that a yes? It's complicated. Adrian swirled his whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the firelight. My family has been involved in various enterprises for several generations. Some legal, some less so. The lines aren't always clear. What kind of enterprises? Import and export, as I mentioned. We facilitate transactions between parties who might not otherwise be able to do business together. We provide protection services for people whose assets might be vulnerable to seizure or theft. We offer financing options for individuals who might not qualify for traditional bank loans. I stared at him. You're describing organized crime like it's a consulting firm. Isn't it, in many ways? We identify market inefficiencies and develop solutions. Legal solutions? Effective solutions. Despite everything, the fear, the confusion, the complete upheaval of my life, I found myself laughing. "What's funny?" Adrian asked, though he looked more curious than offended. "This whole conversation. Yesterday I was worried about whether I could afford groceries, and now I'm sitting in a mansion discussing the business model of organized crime with my husband, the mob boss. I prefer family business owner." "Of course you do." I took a sip of whiskey and felt it burn all the way down. "So what does this mean for me? For us?" "It means you're under my protection, which is considerable. It also means you're a potential target for people who want to hurt me. And it means that the life you knew before is over, permanently." "I figured that out already. Have you?" Adrian leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because there's no going back, Ayla. Once you're fully part of this world, you can't decide you want out. People who try to leave don't usually survive the attempt." The threat was clear, but somehow it didn't frighten me as much as it should have. Maybe I was in shock, or maybe I was finally accepting the reality of what my life had become. "Are you threatening me? I'm warning you, there's a difference. And if I say I want to stay, fully stay, not just play dress-up for dinner parties, then you stay. But you follow my rules, you trust my judgment, and you accept that some things are beyond your understanding or control." I thought about this, weighing his words against the alternatives. Return to my old life and let Rafi face the consequences of his debts alone? Impossible. Stay married to Adrian but remain ignorant and isolated? Equally impossible, given what I'd already learned. "Okay," I said finally. "Okay? I'll stay. I'll follow your rules, mostly. I'll trust your judgment, within reason, but I won't accept being kept in the dark about things that affect my life. And I won't pretend that this marriage is just a business arrangement if it's going to be something more." Adrian studied me for a long moment, and I saw something in his expression that looked almost like admiration. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone easier to manage." I laughed again, and this time Adrian smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "I've never been easy to manage. Ask anyone who's ever employed me. I'll keep that in mind." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling in the grate and the whiskey creating a warm glow in my chest. Outside, I could hear the distant sounds of the city, traffic, sirens, the ordinary chaos of a world that suddenly felt very far away. "Adrian," I said eventually. "Yes?" "What happened to Marcus? How did he get hurt?" Adrian's expression hardened slightly. "There was a disagreement with some associates of your brother's former creditors. Marcus was persuading them that the debt had been transferred to me." "Persuading them how?" "Effectively." The euphemism wasn't lost on me, but somehow the knowledge that Adrian's people had been hurt protecting Rafi made everything more real, more personal. "Is he going to be okay?" "Marcus? He's fine. Thanks to you, actually. Proper medical care probably prevented infection. I just did what anyone would do." "No," Adrian said quietly. "You did what someone with compassion would do. That's rarer than you might think in my world." The next few days passed in a strange kind of honeymoon period. Adrian still left for work each morning, but now he told me where he was going and roughly when he'd be back. He introduced me to more of his associates, men with expensive suits and dangerous eyes, who treated me with the careful respect due to the boss's wife. I learned the rhythms of the house, the subtle hierarchies among the staff, the way business was conducted in spaces that looked like social gatherings. I discovered that the off-limits third floor housed a communications center that would make NASA jealous, and that the wine cellar contained more than vintage bottles. Most importantly, I learned that Adrian wasn't the cold, calculating machine I'd first thought him to be. He was protective of his people, generous with those who served him loyally, and surprisingly gentle with me when we were alone. The physical attraction between us continued to simmer beneath the surface of our daily interactions. Casual touches that lingered longer than necessary, glances across the dinner table that made my pulse quicken. The growing awareness that the enormous bed in my room had never seemed so lonely. But we were taking things slowly, both of us aware that rushing into the physical side of our relationship could complicate an already complex situation. It was on a Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after our wedding, that everything changed. I was in the garden reading when I heard the sound of cars, approaching at high speed, multiple engines, tires squealing as they navigated the circular drive. Through the French doors, I could see Adrian's security team moving with sudden urgency, their casual alertness shifting into something harder and more focused. Adrian appeared at the door to the terrace, his phone pressed to his ear and his face grim. "Get inside," he said to me. "Now." The tone brooked no argument. I followed him into the house, where organized chaos was unfolding. Men in suits I didn't recognize filled the foyer, their conversation tense and rapid. Vincent Torino stood near the stairs, his expression darker than I'd ever seen it. "What's happening?" I asked Adrian. "Business." But his hand found mine, squeezing briefly before he released it. "Stay close to me." Through the crowd, I caught fragments of conversation. Russians made their move. Shipment intercepted. Message from the Kozlov family. Russian Mafia, even someone as naive as I was supposed to be, knew that was bad news. Adrian moved through the crowd with calm authority, issuing quiet orders that sent people scattering to various parts of the house. Within minutes, the mansion had transformed from elegant home to command center, with the kind of efficiency that spoke of long practice. "Vincent," Adrian said, "take Mrs. Moretti upstairs." "No." The word came out before I could stop it. "I'm staying with you." Adrian's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or admiration. "This isn't a discussion." "You're right, it's not. I'm your wife, Adrian, not your prisoner. Whatever's happening, we face it together." For a moment, I thought he might physically carry me upstairs. Then something shifted in his expression, and he nodded curtly. "Stay behind me. Do exactly what I tell you when I tell you to do it. Understood?" "Understood." What followed was like something out of a movie, except the fear was real and the stakes were life and death. Phone calls in languages I didn't recognize. Maps spread across dining room tables. Men checking weapons with the casual expertise of professionals. I stayed close to Adrian, trying to be invisible while absorbing everything around me. I learned that a major shipment had been intercepted by Russian competitors, that this was seen as an act of war, and that retaliation was not a question of if, but when and how. "They want a meeting," Vincent reported after a particularly intense phone conversation. "Tomorrow night. Neutral territory." "They want an ambush," Adrian replied coldly. "Probably, but if we refuse, they'll see it as weakness. And if we go? 50-50 chance we all come home." I must have made some sound of distress, because Adrian glanced back at me. For just a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw the weight he carried, the responsibility for all these lives, the constant calculation of risks and benefits, the isolation of command. Without thinking, I moved closer and touched his arm. He looked down at me, surprised, and I saw something in his eyes that made my heart ache. "We'll figure it out," I said quietly. It was a ridiculous thing to say. What did I know about mafia politics or international crime syndicates? But something in Adrian's expression softened, and he covered my hand with his. "Yes," he said, "we will." The meeting was set for midnight at a warehouse in the industrial district. As the evening wore on, the mansion filled with more armed men, all of them carrying the controlled tension of soldiers preparing for battle. I tried to stay out of the way, but I couldn't help noticing things. The way Adrian's lieutenants looked to him for guidance with absolute trust. The methodical way they planned for multiple contingencies. The fact that despite all the talk of violence and retaliation, they were going into what was obviously a trap, because refusing would be seen as cowardice, honor. That's what it came down to, I realized. These men lived by codes that seemed archaic to outsiders, but were as real as gravity to them. Adrian couldn't back down from the meeting, because doing so would undermine his authority and endanger everyone who depended on him. At 11 o'clock, the convoy began forming in the circular drive. Black cars with tinted windows and armed drivers, moving with the precision of a military operation. Adrian found me in the library, where I'd been pretending to read for the past hour. "I have to go," he said simply. "I know. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. If something happens," he continued as if I hadn't spoken, "Vincent will take care of you. He'll make sure you're safe." I stood up and walked over to him, noting the way he'd changed from his usual expensive suit into something darker, more tactical. He looked like what he was, a man going to war. "Adrian," I said, reaching up to straighten his tie, even though it didn't need straightening, "come back to me." It was the first time I'd ever said anything that acknowledged the growing emotional connection between us. His eyes searched my face, looking for something I wasn't sure I could give him. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Because I'm falling in love with you, and I don't want to be a widow before I figure out what that means." The confession surprised both of us. Adrian stared at me for a long moment, then pulled me against him and kissed me with desperate intensity. "I'll come back," he whispered against my lips. "I promise." I watched from my balcony as the convoy pulled away into the night, taillights disappearing into the darkness like dying stars. Then I went back inside and did the only thing I could do. I waited. The call came at 2:30 in the morning. I was pacing the library, too worried to sleep and too restless to sit still, when Vincent's voice crackled through the intercom system. "Mrs. Moretti, please come to the communications room immediately." The Guy Alpra urgency in his tone made my blood freeze. I ran up the stairs to the third floor, where I'd never been allowed before, and found myself in a high-tech nerve center that looked like something from a spy movie. Vincent stood before a wall of monitors, his face grim. "We have a problem." On the central screen, I could see what looked like warehouse footage, grainy, black and white, but clear enough to show figures moving through the shadows. As I watched, I recognized Adrian's distinctive silhouette among a group of men approaching a building. "The meeting was a setup," Vincent explained. "The Russians brought 3 times as many people as agreed. Our boys are outnumbered and outgunned." My heart hammered against my ribs. What can we do? We can pray they're good enough to fight their way out. As if summoned by his words, the sound of gunfire crackled through the speakers. On screen, the neat formation of figures dissolved into chaos as muzzle flashes lit up the darkness. I gripped the back of Vincent's chair, trying to track Adrian's movement through the mayhem. "There," I said, pointing to a figure diving behind what looked like a shipping container. "Is that him?" "I think so." More gunfire. Shouting in multiple languages. The acrid smell of cordite somehow seemed to seep through the electronic connection, making everything more real and more terrifying. For 20 minutes, we watched the battle unfold on screen. Adrian's people were skilled and disciplined, but they were clearly outnumbered. One by one, I saw figures go down and not get back up. "We have to help them," I said. "We are helping them. We're monitoring the situation and coordinating with the police to stay away from the area." "That's not help, that's damage control." Vincent looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Mrs. Moretti, this is how these things work. We plan for contingencies, we minimize exposure, and we accept that sometimes good people don't come home." "No." The word came out harder than I'd intended. "That's not acceptable." "What do you suggest? That we send in more people to get killed?" I stared at the screen, watching tiny figures that represented the most important person in my life, fighting for survival against impossible odds. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a nobody with no power, no resources, and no influence. But I wasn't a nobody anymore, was I? I was Mrs. Adrian Moretti, and that had to mean something. What leverage do we have? I asked. What do you mean? With the Russians. What do they want besides killing Adrian? Vincent hesitated. They want territory, control of the eastern shipping routes, recognition as equal partners rather than subordinates. So this isn't personal, it's business. In our world, those things are often the same. On screen, another figure went down. My chest tightened with fear and rage and helplessness. Get me a phone, I said suddenly. Mrs. Moretti, get me a phone, Vincent. Now. Something in my tone must have convinced him, because he handed me a secure satellite phone without further argument. I need you to get me connected to whoever's in charge of the Russian operation. That's not how this works. It's how it works now. I met his eyes, letting him see that I wasn't backing down. I'm going to make them an offer. It took Vincent 15 minutes and several tense phone calls to establish contact with Dmitry Kozlov, the man who'd orchestrated the ambush. When the phone finally rang, I answered it myself. Mr. Kozlov, this is Ayla Moretti, Adrian's wife. Silence on the other end, then heavily accented English. Mrs. Moretti, this is unexpected. I'm sure it is. I understand you have a business dispute with my husband. Your husband has been interfering with my family's operations. This is not a dispute. This is war. Wars are expensive, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. They cost money, they cost lives, and they draw unwanted attention from law enforcement. I'd like to propose an alternative. Another pause. I'm listening. A sit-down. Real negotiations. Not this cowboy nonsense that's going to get everyone killed and accomplish nothing. You want territory? Recognition? A bigger piece of the pie? Fine. Let's talk about it like civilized business people, instead of shooting up warehouses like we're in some bad action movie. I could hear voices conferring in rapid Russian in the background. And why should I trust your husband to honor any agreement we might reach? Kozlov asked finally. Because I'll personally guarantee it. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Vincent stared at me with wide eyes, clearly understanding the magnitude of what I'd just committed to. You? Kozlov sounded amused. What guarantee could you possibly offer? My life, I said simply. If Adrian breaks faith with whatever agreement we reach, you can kill me. But if you kill him tonight, you'll have to go through me to do it. And I promise you that won't be as easy as you think. The silence stretched so long, I thought the connection had been lost. Then Kozlov spoke again, and I could hear something that sounded almost like respect in his voice. You have stones, Mrs. Moretti. Very well. I will call off my people, but only temporarily. You have 48 hours to arrange this sit-down. If your husband tries to use this time to plan retaliation, he won't. For your sake, I hope you're right. The line went dead, and I handed the phone back to Vincent with hands that were only slightly shaking. Jesus Christ, he breathed. Do you have any idea what you just did? I saved my husband's life. You put yourself in the crosshairs of the most dangerous criminal organization on the East Coast. Then we'd better make sure those negotiations go well, hadn't we? On screen, the gunfire had stopped. Figures were emerging from cover, helping wounded comrades toward waiting vehicles, and there, moving with the purposeful stride I'd come to recognize, even at a distance, was Adrian. He was alive, hurt judging by the way he favored his left arm, but alive. Vincent, I said, not taking my eyes off the screen, I need you to set up a meeting for tomorrow night. Neutral location, equal security, and enough witnesses to keep everyone honest. Mrs. Moretti. And Vincent? From now on, I'm part of the inner circle. Not as decoration or as someone to be protected, but as an active participant in family business. Is that understood? Vincent looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact moment when his perception of me shifted from boss's wife to boss. Understood, he said quietly. By the time Adrian's convoy returned to the mansion, I had everything arranged. The meeting would take place at a high-end restaurant with private dining rooms and excellent security. Equal numbers of people from both sides, weapons checked at the door, and a written agreement prepared in advance, covering the basic terms we'd discussed. I was waiting in the foyer when Adrian walked through the front door, his suit torn and bloody, his face grim with exhaustion and suppressed pain. When he saw me, relief flooded his features. You're safe, he said, pulling me against him with his good arm. So are you. I held him tight, breathing in the scent of gunpowder and fear and the cologne that was uniquely his. How bad are you hurt? Just a graze, I'll live. He pulled back to look at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my pulse quicken. Vincent told me what you did. I made a phone call. You saved my life, and the lives of 6 other good men. I made a deal, Adrian, and now we have to honor it. What kind of deal? I told him about the conversation with Kozlov, about the guarantee I'd offered, about the meeting I'd arranged. With each detail, Adrian's expression grew more troubled. You put yourself at risk, he said finally. I put myself in the same position you've been in since the day we met, responsible for keeping people alive through intelligence and negotiation instead of violence. It's not the same thing, isn't it? I touched his face, noting the exhaustion lines around his eyes. Adrian, I can't live in this world as a passive observer. I can't sit in my beautiful room and pretend that your life and mine aren't connected, that your enemies aren't my enemies, that your choices don't affect my future. I wanted to protect you from this. I know, but I don't want to be protected anymore. I want to be your partner, your equal, your wife in every sense of the word. Adrian stared at me for a long moment, and I saw him wrestling with something. Fear, maybe? Or the ingrained habit of shouldering all responsibility alone. The meeting is in 18 hours, I continued. We can spend that time arguing about whether I should have acted, or we can spend it preparing to win. And if we lose, if Kozlov decides the terms aren't acceptable and goes back to war, then we fight together. But we don't lose, Adrian. We can't afford to. The next evening, I sat beside Adrian at a polished conference table in the private dining room of Marcello's, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Across from us, Dmitry Kozlov and his lieutenants had the hard, weathered faces of men who'd survived decades in a business where retirement was rarely voluntary. The negotiations had been going on for 3 hours, and we were making progress. Slowly, carefully, with every word chosen for maximum precision and minimum offense. We were hammering out the framework for a truce. Territory would be divided along agreed-upon lines. Certain shipping routes would be shared, with profits split according to a complex formula that would satisfy both sides' sense of honor and greed. Future disputes would be handled through arbitration rather than violence. Most importantly, both families would publicly acknowledge the other's legitimacy and right to operate within their spheres of influence. There remains the question of guarantee, Kozlov said, his eyes fixed on me. Mrs. Moretti made a very generous offer, but I think we need something more concrete. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression calm. What did you have in mind? A marriage. The words hit the table like a bomb. Adrian's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight enough to bruise. Explain, he said, his voice deadly quiet. My nephew Victor, Kozlov continued. Good boy, university educated, very handsome. He needs a wife from a good family. Mrs. Moretti has a brother, yes? Young man, I'm told. Handsome like his sister. I felt the blood drain from my face. You want Rafi to marry your nephew. Insurance policy. Victor marries the brother of Mrs. Moretti. Our families are connected by blood. Much harder to break agreement when breaking agreement means hurting relatives. Adrian's grip on my hand tightened further. Absolutely not. Is not your decision, Kozlov replied calmly. Mrs. Moretti made guarantee with her life. She decides how to honor guarantee. The room went silent except for the soft clink of ice in water glasses and the distant sounds of the restaurant's dinner service. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for my response to a proposal that would solve our immediate problems, while creating an entirely new set of complications. Rafi, married to a Russian mobster's nephew, tied permanently to this world of violence and moral compromise. Safe, but at the cost of his freedom to choose his own path. I need to talk to my brother, I said finally. Of course, family consultation is important. Kozlov checked his expensive watch. We will reconvene tomorrow evening, same time, same place. The drive home was silent, both Adrian and I lost in our own thoughts. It wasn't until we were back in the mansion, alone in his study with the door closed, that either of us spoke. You can't agree to this, Adrian said. Why not? Because Rafi didn't choose this life. You did when you married me, but he's innocent. Innocent? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Adrian, Rafi's gambling debts are what got us into this situation in the first place. He's not some naive kid who stumbled into trouble. He's a grown man who made bad choices and nearly got himself killed. That doesn't mean we should sacrifice his future to solve our problems. And what's the alternative? We refuse Kozlov's terms. The truce falls apart and people die. Including, quite possibly, us. Adrian moved to the window, staring out at the grounds where armed guards patrolled with casual vigilance. There has to be another way. Maybe there is, but I don't see it and we're running out of time. My phone buzzed with a text from Rafi. Can you meet for coffee tomorrow? I have news. I showed the message to Adrian, who frowned. What kind of news? Only one way to find out. The next morning, I met Rafi at the same diner where Vincent had first explained Adrian's marriage proposal. 3 weeks ago, I'd sat in these same cracked vinyl booths as a different person entirely. A hospital cleaner with no power, no resources, and no understanding of how the world really worked. Now I was negotiating with Russian mob bosses and making decisions that could determine whether people lived or died. Rafi looked good. Better than he had in months, actually. The bruises from his beating had faded. His color was healthy, and he carried himself with the confident posture of someone who no longer feared looking over his shoulder. You look different, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. Different how? Older, more serious. He studied my face with concern. Are you okay? This marriage thing, it's working out all right. It's complicated. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, using the warmth to steady myself. Rafi, I need to ask you something, and I need you to give me a completely honest answer. Okay. Are you happy? The question seemed to surprise him. Happy? I don't know. I'm alive, which is more than I expected to be a month ago. Why? Because I might have an opportunity to guarantee your safety permanently, but it would mean making a major change in your life. I explained Kozlov's proposal, watching Rafi's expression shift from confusion to understanding to something that looked almost like relief. A marriage of convenience, he said when I finished. Like yours. Similar, yes, but Rafi, you have to understand what you'd be agreeing to. This isn't just about marrying someone you don't love. It's about joining a criminal organization. Once you're in, there's no getting out. Would I be safe? Yes, completely. Would you be safe? If you agree to this, yes. Rafi was quiet for a long time, stirring sugar into his coffee with mechanical precision. Finally, he looked up, at me with eyes that seemed older than they had a few minutes before. Tell me about him, Victor. I don't know much. Mid-20s, educated, apparently attractive. His uncle seems to respect him. And I'd be doing this to protect you. You'd be doing this to protect all of us. But Rafi, I won't pressure you. This has to be your choice, made with full understanding of what it means. What it means is that my sister gets to live, he said quietly. What it means is that I finally get to pay back some of the debt I owe you for all the times you've saved my ass. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. He reached across the table and took my hand. Ayla, I've been thinking a lot about my life, about the choices I've made, about where I was headed before all this happened. I was a mess. No direction, no purpose, no sense of responsibility for anyone or anything. Maybe this is exactly what I need. Marriage to a stranger you'll meet at the altar. A chance to be part of something bigger than myself. A chance to matter, to contribute to something important. He smiled, and for the first time in years, it looked completely genuine. Besides, stranger marriages seem to work out pretty well for Castellano women. That evening, I sat beside Rafi at the same conference table where the previous night's negotiations had taken place. Across from us, Viktor Kozlov was nothing like what I'd expected from the nephew of a Russian crime boss. He was younger than I'd anticipated, probably 25, with the kind of classical features that belonged in Renaissance paintings. More importantly, he carried himself with quiet intelligence rather than the aggressive machismo I'd learned to associate with men in this business. Miss, he said to Rafi, extending his hand, it's a pleasure to meet you. His English was accented but perfect, and his handshake was firm without being possessive. When he smiled, it reached his eyes. Likewise, Rafi replied, and I heard something in his voice that sounded almost like interest. The formal negotiations took less than an hour. Terms were agreed upon, timelines established, and guarantees secured. Victor and Rafi would be married within the month, after which Victor would relocate to the city permanently and take over management of certain family interests. Is good match, Dmitry Kozlov declared when the papers were signed. Victor needs someone with spirit, and your brother has spirit, I think. He wasn't wrong. Watching Rafi and Victor talk during the reception that followed, I was struck by how comfortable they seemed with each other. Not romantic attraction, that would probably come later, if at all, but genuine compatibility. They laughed at each other's jokes, found common ground in their shared experiences with higher education, and seemed to be building the foundation for something that could become real affection, given time. You did well, Adrian said quietly, appearing beside me, with 2 glasses of champagne. We did well. This was a team effort. I'm proud of you. What you did took courage. What I did was solve a problem using the resources available to me, just like you taught me. Adrian smiled, and I saw something in his expression that made my pulse quicken. Is that what I taught you? Among other things. What else did I teach you? The question was loaded with implications that had nothing to do with business negotiations or family alliances. We were standing in a room full of dangerous people who could kill us both without breaking a sweat. But all I could think about was the way Adrian was looking at me, like I was the most fascinating puzzle he'd ever encountered. You taught me that marriage can be more than just a legal contract, I said quietly. You taught me that trust is earned through actions, not words. And you taught me that love can grow in the most unlikely circumstances. Love? The word hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we were ready to cross. But we'd come this far together, through violence and fear and impossible negotiations. What was one more leap of faith? I love you, Adrian Moretti, I said, loud enough for him to hear, but quiet enough that the admission remained private. I love your intelligence, your strength, your protective instincts, and your surprising capacity for gentleness. I love the way you've let me become your partner instead of just your possession. And I love the man you are when you think no one is watching. Adrian set down both champagne glasses and cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones with infinite tenderness. I love you too, he said simply. I didn't expect to, but I do, completely. When he kissed me, it was different from the desperate, hungry kisses we'd shared before. This was a promise, a commitment, a declaration that we'd chosen each other not out of necessity, but out of genuine desire. Around us, the reception continued. Criminals and their families celebrating an alliance that would prevent bloodshed and ensure prosperity. But for just a moment, none of that mattered. There was only Adrian and me, and the future we were building together one impossible day at a time. 3 months later, I stood in the garden of our mansion, and it was our mansion now truly, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The rose bushes that had seemed so intimidating when I first arrived were blooming magnificently, their perfume mixing with the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. Adrian found me there, as he did most mornings, carrying 2 cups of espresso and wearing the silk pajamas I'd bought him for his birthday. Good morning, Mrs. Moretti, he said, handing me my coffee and settling beside me on the stone bench we'd had installed near the fountain. Good morning, Mr. Moretti. It was our routine now, this quiet time before the day's business began. In an hour, the phones would start ringing and the meetings would commence, and we'd transform back into the power couple who'd negotiated peace between warring crime families. But for now, we were just Adrian and Ayla, drinking coffee and watching the world wake up. Rafi called last night, I said. He and Victor are thinking about adopting a dog. That sounds domestic, doesn't it? I smiled, still amazed by how well my brother's arranged marriage was working out. He sounds happy. Really happy, not just putting on a brave face. Love finds a way, Adrian said, philosophically. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? I considered the question, thinking about everything that had brought us to this moment, the desperation that had driven me to accept a stranger's marriage proposal, the fear that had motivated Adrian to seek a convenient wife, the violence and danger that had tested our commitment to each other. None of it had been romantic in any conventional sense. But somewhere between the gunfights and the negotiations, the threats and the promises, we'd found something rare and precious, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection that had grown into something deeper. I'd call it fate, I said finally. The universe's way of making sure the right people find each other, even when they're not looking. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. The best kind, Adrian laughed and pulled me closer, and I settled against his side with the contentment of someone who'd found exactly where she belonged. The mansion walls that had once felt like prison barriers now represented safety and home. The dangerous men who'd once intimidated me were now allies and friends. The husband who'd once been a stranger was now the other half of my soul. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the life I'd chosen. And as the sun rose higher and the day's possibilities stretched out before us, I couldn't imagine wanting anything else. Ready to go inside? Adrian asked eventually. I looked back at the house, our house, with its soaring windows and elegant proportions, its secret rooms and hidden depths. Somewhere inside, Vincent was probably already reviewing the morning reports. Elena was preparing breakfast, and Marcus was checking the security feeds. All of them part of the extended family we'd built around ourselves. All of them counting on us to keep them safe and prosperous. Ready, I said, and meant it. We walked back toward the house together, Adrian's arm around my waist and my head resting against his shoulder. Behind us, the roses continued blooming in defiance of the approaching winter, their beauty made more precious by its temporary nature. Just like love, just like happiness, just like the life we'd stolen from chaos and violence and turned into something worth protecting. At the terrace doors, Adrian paused and turned to look back at the garden, his expression thoughtful. "Any regrets?" he asked. I thought about it seriously, considering all the paths not taken, all the lives I might have lived if Rafi hadn't gotten into debt, if Adrian hadn't needed a convenient wife, if I hadn't been brave enough to say yes to an impossible proposition. None, I said, and discovered it was absolutely true. Adrian smiled, that real smile that transformed his entire face and reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. "Good," he said, and led me inside to begin another day in our beautiful, dangerous, impossible life. As the doors closed behind us, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the glass. Two people who'd started as strangers and become partners, who'd turned a marriage of convenience into a love story, who'd found each other in the dark and chosen to build something bright. The poor cleaner and the Mafia boss, rewriting their own ending one day at a time, and living happily, if not ever after, then at least for now.